Hi, my name is Jack Kehoe. I'm 22 years old and I'm from Portland, Oregon. I remember one day when I was 15, I was going through my parents' medicine cabinet and I found a bottle of Tussinex, an opiate cough syrup like codeine, and I opened it up and drank the whole bottle down and then headed off to my friend's house. And by the time I got there, I was itching and scratching all over, and my thinking was pretty fuzzy. And an hour or so later, me and some of my friends decided to see if we could find our friend's parents' alcohol. And so we found some tequila and started drinking it down. And I hadn't thought about at that point how that might mix with the cough syrup. But within 30 or 40 minutes, I lost my vision completely and could barely walk. And then my memory kind of goes in and out. But I remember coming to getting dragged by two friends down some railroad tracks with my feet behind me. And then my memory went out again. And then I remember waking up in the middle of the night in my bed, but I had the worst pain in my head that I've ever felt. Felt like someone had put a crowbar down the center of my skull and was prying it open from the inside. And I fell out of bed and crawled on hands and knees to the bathroom and then started throwing up again and again all over the toilet and over the floor. And then I remember curling up in a ball and passing back out. And I woke up the next day feeling fine. Then I remember 3 days before my 16th birthday, um, I decided to skip my soccer practice and take some friends downtown to see if we could get alcohol. And we had Four Locos, so I drank about half of Four Loco and was walking around the local grocery store asking different adults if they would go in and buy us alcohol. And eventually we got a homeless man to buy us a 30 rack of beer. And he came out and gave me and my friends all the beer, and we loaded it into our backpacks and started walking. Um, we got about 2 blocks, and a cop car pulled up, and the officer stepped out and asked us what we had in our backpacks. About an hour later, me and my best friend were bent over the back of the police car getting handcuffed right on the main street of my hometown. And I remember seeing friends and family driving by. We were taken to juvie and held there for the night. Then, after my sophomore year when I was 16, I remember coming home one day really high. We had just made a couple batches of pot brownies to sell, and so I had 2 trays of pot brownies in my trunk with a bunch of alcohol and other substances. And I came inside and went to bed. Was woken up a short time later by my parents bringing me downstairs, and everything that was in my trunk was laid out on our kitchen table. And my parents were saying that I needed to either go to rehab or to military school or to get in some new situation where I could stop doing drugs. And we ended up moving states and getting me into a private school with drug dogs and seeing a drug counselor. So from the age of 14 to 17, I slowly became more and more obsessed with drugs, and they started taking over my life. It started with just smoking weed with friends, and then I moved into pills and cough syrup and harder drugs along the way. And for me, it wasn't just a fun thing. It was something that gave me fulfillment and provided an escape from everything that I couldn't handle in my day-to-day life, from all the pain and all the things that I didn't like about my circumstances and my situation. So this led into depression and taking antidepressants, but nothing was really helping. And so I remember by the end of my junior year, I was pretty hopeless, and my family also. didn't have much hope for me changing because they had tried everything, and I felt like I had also tried everything. And I remember one day getting a call from the youth pastor of our church from Portland that I had gone to a bit growing up. And he just asked me if I wanted to come on a mission trip with their church to San Francisco to serve the homeless. Um, and honestly, I was surprised that he would call me, knowing who I was and the kind of things that I had done, that he would invite me personally to this trip. Um, and that was enough for me to decide to go. And I was also in a place where I needed something to help me change, but I didn't know what it was. So, when I was 17 years old, it was in June, I went to San Francisco with this church from Portland. And right up until the night before, I remember getting drunk and stoned with friends and getting on the church mission trip bus, still high and drunk the morning of, and heading off down to San Francisco. When we got there, the first few days of the trip were kind of weird for me because I wasn't used to being in that kind of environment around religious people. Um, and I was kind of trying to just slide by. And I remember halfway through the week, it was Wednesday night. On a lot of these types of mission trips, they have a night where it's supposed to be really powerful and people encounter God and give their lives to Jesus. And this was one of those nights, and all these students were crying and had their hands in the air, singing to God. And I just remember sitting there and thinking how sad it was that all these religious people were missing out on the fun and the life that I get to live and all the things that I get to experience. Um, and that thought prompted me to pray. And so I just said, God, if you're real, please show me something. That was all I said. And it was just in my head. And then I continued to sit there for the rest of this night. A couple hours later, as everyone was going to bed, I went out of our room and went into the kind of like staff conference room of this mission. And there was a guy in there named Zach, who's a 19-year-old missionary who worked at this mission. And we ended up getting into a really good conversation. And I asked Zach, what are the craziest things you've seen in your life? Like, what have you seen God do if you really believe in him? And Zach just told me some of the craziest stories I'd ever heard. He told me a time of being out on the streets and coming across a woman with a knee that couldn't really bend or work. And him and his friends prayed for her knee, and they saw Jesus heal her right in front of their eyes. And he said the woman was crying, and he was crying, and they were all laughing. And he told me several other miracle stories like this of Jesus doing things right in front of him, right in that moment when he prayed. And I had never heard stories like this before. And Zach was one of those guys where I could just tell that he was being honest. And I knew that what he was saying was true. So I was so moved by these stories that I left that room, and I just felt really good about what he was saying. And it moved me to pray and just to say, Jesus, I believe that you're real, and I'm sorry that I haven't lived for you, and I want to live the rest of my life for you, and I want to see you do things like that, and I want to do things like that in my life like Zach has done. And I just remember like joy coming over me, really like happiness for the first time in a long time. And I wrote it all out in my journal and then went to bed that night. And the next morning I woke up feeling super different. Like everything just seemed brighter and things felt lighter all around. And we went out on the streets to go and talk with homeless people and give out food. And I remember praying for some people. And I had been like praying for people the days before, but I didn't believe in prayer until the night before. And so the following day when I prayed for people on the streets, I remember praying, and then I would open my eyes and people would be crying. They would just be sobbing. And I was shocked by that every time I would open my eyes, and I was like, what is going on? something's happening when I'm praying. And so over these next couple of days, I was really excited about starting to follow Jesus, but I still didn't know how I was going to go home from this trip and have a different life, because none of my friends followed Jesus, and I didn't have a lifestyle that supported that or knew what that would look like. Um, so it was the last night of this mission trip, and a group of 10 or so of us guys decided to go into the staff conference room at night and debrief over the week on all the things that had happened. And Zach, the missionary guy, came in there with us as well. And I remember during this conversation, guys were crying and sharing really vulnerable stuff. And I hadn't really been a part of a conversation like that before with guys my age. But as this conversation was going on, I was wearing a cross necklace around my neck, and I started gripping the cross with my right hand, and I started staring off into space. I wasn't really sure what was going on. I was zoning out of the conversation, and I remember thinking, I didn't take any drugs today. I don't know why I'm feeling this way, because my vision's going out and going in, and I'm gripping this cross really tightly. And then I remember realizing that I was staring at a Bible when my vision would come clear again. And I was really confused by that. And they were still talking all around me. And I remember Zach started talking. And I started saying this phrase in my head. I was saying, God, help me help them, God, over and over again. Just saying, God, help me help them, God. And I didn't know where that thought came from or why I was saying that. And then Zach said, I want to pray for you guys. And so I dropped my cross necklace and started holding hands with the two guys next to me. And as soon as Zach started praying for us, my hands and feet started shaking and my body started to get really hot all over. And by the time he ended the prayer, my hands came back together and my whole body was shaking in this chair. And I felt really warm and really good all over. And I remember my friend Mac next to me touching my chest and saying, Jack, are you okay? Are you okay? And later he told me that he could physically see my heart beating through my shirt. So I'm sitting there in this chair, shaking and feeling really good. And then I leaned back in the chair. And I remember when I leaned all the way back, I left my body and entered into this bright white light, like bigger and better than anything I'd ever experienced before. It was just infinite. Like there was no end to this brilliant light. And it was the best feeling I'd ever had in my life up until that point. And I was in that for about 2 minutes, and then I came back down. And when I came back, I opened my eyes and I was staring at a Bible again, and I couldn't speak or move, and my body was still shaking. And then there was about 20 or 30 more minutes of me not being able to speak or move, but just my body shaking and me staring at this Bible. And it's pretty late at night at this point, and so eventually they decided that they wanted to go and wake up the youth pastor. And so someone went and got the youth pastor and brought him in. And he had all of the students leave. And so it was just me, John, the youth pastor, and Zach in this room together. And they were trying to ask me questions, but I couldn't move my body yet. And I remember they asked, what did it start with? They were asking about the experience. And I was just barely able to move my finger to point at the cross on my neck. And they grabbed the cross and they said, it started with this. And they were asking me more questions, and eventually Zach followed my vision because I was still staring at the Bible at this point. It was like the Bible had this magnetic pole on it that was pulsing and holding my gaze on it. And Zach followed my vision and saw that I was staring at the Bible, and he said, "This? You want this?" And I remember just being so excited because I wanted that so badly, and just finally being able to nod my head yes. And so then they moved the Bible in front of me, and John, my youth pastor, opened up the Bible, and he started listing off books. I hadn't really read the Bible to my memory at this point, so I didn't know different books. And he was saying things. He was saying Genesis. Is it John? Is it Luke? And then he said, is it Joshua? And when he said Joshua, I just nodded my head yes. And I didn't know why. And then he started listing off verses, and he eventually came to Joshua 1:9. And when he asked that, again, I nodded my head yes. So he read aloud Joshua 1:9, which is, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And when he read that over me, it was like someone had taken a bucket of cold water and dumped it over my whole body. Everything was clenched up until that point, and all my muscles loosened, and it was the best feeling hearing those words read over me. And eventually I started to be able to move my hands again, and so I pointed and had John read Joshua 1:16 through 18, and then eventually John 1:5 as well. And so they brought in some of the church elders. It's probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and they've brought in some of the church elders and a doctor as well. And I'm starting to be able to move my body again, and so they put a pen and paper in front of me, and they start asking me questions. And they asked, "Did you have a seizure?" And I just remember writing back to them over pen and paper and saying, "No, the Holy Spirit was inside of me." And eventually I started to be able to speak again, and they wanted to take me to the hospital because they said, "Jack, you just had symptoms of a seizure. We know that you think this was a spiritual experience, but we want to take you in and make sure." So that was kind of what they were deciding. And then all of a sudden, John, the youth pastor, was like, "Wait, I just realized that of all 67 students on this mission trip, you're the one student that never turned in their medical forms. So we legally can't take you to the hospital right now." And I remember saying, "John, that was God. It's meant to be. I'm not supposed to go to the hospital." He knew beforehand that this was going to happen and that I'm not supposed to go there now. And so all the elders and the doctor and John were talking, and they decided that the doctor was going to just run some tests on me. And so she had me stand up and hop on one foot and touch my nose and look into a flashlight. And she was really confused because she was saying, if you just had a seizure, you shouldn't be able to do any of these things. So I guess this must be God. And ultimately, they decided to let me sleep through the night and have one of the elders stay with me in the room. And if I had symptoms again, then they would take me to the hospital. So I left that room and shared with all my friends of what had just happened, and then went to bed. And the next day, I woke up and got to share with 80 or so people at this mission what had happened to me the night before. And I remember as I was sharing, just looking around and seeing people jaw dropped and crying because they all knew what kind of person I was. And to hear that God had encountered me the night before was a miracle for all of us. So in this experience, I think God showed me a lot about who I am and about what I can live for and what I can do. He spoke identity over me and told me that I'm strong and that I'm courageous and that he's going to be with me wherever I go, no matter what I do. And he also gave me that experience in entering into that light and having this really, really amazing feeling. He was showing me that over those previous 3 years where I had been seeking after some kind of experience and some kind of high, he was showing me that what I'd really been looking for was him and an experience of the Holy Spirit and encountering his presence, because that's where true joy is found. So that experience honestly changed me entirely as a person. I came back to school and started Bible studies and worship nights and started sharing with everyone that would listen about the story of what had happened to me. And I remember one day I was walking to the cafeteria with one of my friends, and I was listening to worship music. And this was one of my friends that I hung out with a lot in the previous years. And he asked me, what music are you listening to right now? And I told him I was listening to Christian music. And I just remember him looking at me and saying, there's literally nothing that is the same about you anymore. And that scared me at the time. But now looking back on it, I realized that it was God who completely changed who I am. And I want to share this story with everyone because God doesn't just want to do this in my life. His desire is that all of us would come to know him in this way. Um, and he's there and he's waiting for you to just call upon him and ask him, God, show me something. Come. Are you real? And then deciding to follow him and giving our lives to Jesus. And so I'm really excited to share this with you guys today, and thank you for listening.